Every criminal strives to conceal evidence of their deeds, and some succeed so masterfully that they live free for years, evading justice. On that spring day, April 19, 1991, a 12-year-old student was making his way home from school. The clock showed 1:10 p.m. when he got off the bus and headed down the familiar road. The boy's family lived in the small town of Croydon, Pennsylvania, home to approximately 10,000 residents. The student had received excellent grades and was hurrying to share the good news with his mother. That day, students had been dismissed early specifically so children could delight their parents with their academic achievements. Additionally, the family had recently gotten a small puppy that the boy was eager to play with. However, as he approached the house, the child noticed something was wrong. Several dozen feet from the building, he saw black clouds of smoke billowing from behind the doors. Looking through the window, the student spotted fire on the kitchen stove. His first thought was that his mother had left something cooking and stepped out of the house. The boy was deeply worried about the small puppy that could be harmed by the fire. He had no idea that something far more terrible had happened inside the house. Hearing the child's desperate screams, a neighbor immediately dialed 911 and rushed outside. He had to restrain the boy, who was trying to break into the flame-engulfed house. The man himself attempted to enter, but was forced to retreat. The fire had spread too extensively, making it extremely dangerous. Within minutes, firefighters and emergency responders arrived on scene. The child was still trying to get to the house, begging them to save the puppy. After the firefighters managed to control the blaze, they entered the house for inspection. What they discovered was far worse than their expectations. In one of the bedrooms, on the bed, lay a woman's body. The fire had severely damaged the remains, but it was initially believed to be the homeowner, 35-year-old Joy Hibbs. Investigators immediately took on the case but made no hasty conclusions until the victim's identity was officially established, as the body was too badly damaged. They had to resort to dental records, which confirmed it was indeed Joy. The deceased was the wife of Charles Hibbs and mother of 16-year-old Angie and 12-year-old David. David was the first family member to arrive at the burned ruins. His older sister attended a different school and hadn't yet returned home. The fire investigation specialist concluded that the fire was intentionally set. The blaze had been started simultaneously at 4 points in the house, in the kitchen, hallway, and bedroom. Area residents who witnessed the tragedy and learned of the homeowner's death were shocked. They knew Joy as a friendly and quiet woman who didn't deserve such a horrible fate. Initially, the cause of death was believed to be smoke inhalation, but when the medical examiner began a detailed examination, serious doubts arose about this theory. It took 2 days to carefully study the burned remains. On April 21, 1991, shocking details emerged that forced authorities to reclassify the case from an accident to premeditated murder. Examination of the 35-year-old victim's lungs revealed no traces of smoke. This meant the woman had died before the fire started. The medical examiner found evidence of 5 knife wounds in the neck and upper chest area. An electrical cord from a household appliance was also found around her throat. Despite the plastic insulation having melted, the metal wires still encircled the deceased's neck. Initially, there was speculation about a sexual motive for the crime. However, the victim's jeans and underwear had been removed carefully, with the button still fastened. Thus, the fire was definitely not the cause of death. Evidently, the perpetrator had used fire to destroy any traces that might lead back to them. Forensics carefully collected all knives in the house, hoping to find the murder weapon among them. During the search, they also discovered a flannel shirt with bloodstains in a closet that none of the family members recognized. Understandably, in such cases, investigators' attention immediately focuses on the victim's inner circle. The extreme brutality suggested possible personal hatred from the killer toward their victim. Investigators immediately contacted the 36-year-old husband of the deceased. Charles worked in construction and equipment maintenance. According to his statement, he had been at his workplace on the day of the tragedy. Detectives conducted an interview with him. From the first moments, he appeared to be a grief-stricken husband. He had difficulty speaking and couldn't believe his beloved was no longer alive. Charles logically found himself among the prime suspects, as statistics show that in such crimes, the closest people are most often guilty. The husband actively cooperated with the investigation, voluntarily providing biological samples for DNA analysis, fingerprints, and agreeing to a lie detector test. Most painful for him was the realization that the tragedy had occurred shortly after their 18th wedding anniversary. Joy had been his first love, the only woman in his life. They had married immediately after his 18th birthday. Although initial suspicions weren't confirmed, investigators kept Charles under scrutiny for a long time. Mainly due to the absence of other leads. The husband's alibi was thoroughly verified, several witnesses confirmed his presence at work at the time of the crime and fire. No motive was found either, as everyone characterized the couple as very much in love and harmonious. The deceased's 16-year-old daughter, Angie, was in class during the tragedy. The girl told investigators that several weeks before the murder, unknown individuals had damaged her mother's car tires and broken the back doors of the house. Joy had even hidden these incidents from her husband. The victim's co-workers informed detectives about strange phone calls. Some man had been calling Joy at work with death threats. It appeared the woman had acquired an enemy whom she feared. Now they needed to establish his identity. The fire had destroyed most of the physical evidence, leaving forensics with minimal information to work with. Joy's wallet was found stuffed between couch cushions in the living room. It appeared cash had been taken from it. That morning, the woman had cashed a check at the bank for $70, but this money was missing. She should have had additional funds on her as well. According to her husband, approximately $100 was missing. Of course, such a sum was too small to be a motive for murder, arson, or staging a home robbery. After completing their examination of the premises, investigators interviewed the Hibbs family's neighbors. The houses stood less than 20 yards apart, so any suspicious sounds should have been heard. Especially since it was hot weather, and many houses had open windows. A married couple living next door had been working in their yard that day, cleaning up the property. But even they hadn't noticed anything suspicious. However, other residents of the area provided important testimony. According to them, around noon, two men had come to Joy with an invitation to a church service. Witnesses noticed a dark blue car from the 80s that they had never seen there before. These people said that Joy hadn't responded to doorbell rings or knocking. Prior to this incident, they had seen her only once. The Hibbs family had attended an Easter service at their church. Now the pastor, along with one parishioner, had decided to invite the family again. This information automatically made them suspects. Reconstructing Joy's last day chronology, police determined her schedule. In the morning, the woman had visited the bank to collect her paycheck. At that time, she worked as a nurse. There she also cashed the check. Then the woman visited a grocery store and returned to her home. Joy had no contact with other people until the moment when the pastor of the local religious community, accompanied by another man, visited her house. Both visitors categorically denied any involvement in the crime but automatically fell into the circle of murder and arson suspects. Law enforcement conducted numerous interviews with them, trying to establish the truth. Investigators initially considered these people involved in the crime, as the time of their visit practically coincided with the estimated time of the woman's death. Eventually, they were deemed unlikely suspects and cleared of suspicion. They also showed willingness to cooperate and complied with all investigation requirements. The tragedy deeply affected the local community, which took it as a personal loss. Residents were shocked that in broad daylight, a perpetrator could break into their neighbor's home. The town hotly discussed how someone could so brutally take a life without attracting any attention from neighbors. Spontaneous community meetings were organized where neighbors proposed a system of code signals for communication in emergencies. Under this system, by calling any neighbor's home number, one only needed to speak a neutral phrase about product delivery. The perpetrator couldn't decipher its true meaning, but the neighbor, hearing the code signal, would immediately call the police. This somewhat calmed the community. However, residents continued to worry about their safety and pressured the police, demanding that detectives quickly apprehend the criminal who posed a threat to the community's peace. The deceased's husband meanwhile was rebuilding the fire-damaged house. Being a construction professional, he had no difficulty with this work, unlike trying to rebuild meaning in his own existence. Speaking with press representatives, he repeatedly stated that after the tragedy, his life had become empty. Charles had even lost faith in God. The man couldn't understand what Joy could have done to deserve such a horrible fate, as she had been an extraordinarily welcoming and kind-hearted woman who had never harmed anyone in her entire life. He characterized his wife as a bright personality who enjoyed fishing and gardening. The couple had always found pleasure in time spent together, even in simple conversations, seeing this as a way to strengthen their relationship. They regularly visited flea markets, traveled on motorcycles, sometimes without a specific destination, simply enjoying the process. In conversations with police, Charles emphasized that Joy had been a physically strong and athletic woman, so only someone from her inner circle could have attacked her. She wouldn't have let a stranger get close enough to inflict fatal wounds and strangulation. In any case, he couldn't name anyone in her circle who would pose a mortal threat to her. The investigation stalled. All suspects' alibis had been checked and confirmed. The Hibbs family wasn't going to accept this situation, so they announced a $5,000 reward for any information that would help find the killer. Subsequently, many reports came from various witnesses, but all checks showed that the information was either false or the latest suspect had a confirmed alibi. Detectives were particularly interested in a car. A blue Chevrolet Monte Carlo had been carelessly parked in the driveway around noon. Neighbors had noticed it when they came to chat with Joy. According to eyewitnesses, the owner was supposed to be a young man from among the Hibbs family's neighbors. The owner's identity was established without effort. He lived 2 houses away from the victim but was out of town on a vacation trip with his wife. His sudden departure seemed suspicious, so detectives summoned him for questioning immediately upon his return from the trip. The neighbor's name was Robert Atkins. He dealt in trafficking and periodically visited Joy, selling her marijuana. His wife maintained a friendly relationship with Joy. During communication with law enforcement representatives, he only intensified suspicions, as he showed obvious unwillingness to cooperate with the investigation and even refused a polygraph test. However, he allowed police officers to examine his vehicle. It turned out to be a blue car, but of a different make. The interior inspection revealed nothing suspicious. Robert was excluded from the list of suspects, and the investigation again reached a dead end. In 2014, the local newspaper published an article by the neighbor who had first heard the desperate screams of the Hibbs family's son. He described in detail everything he remembered about that incident, recalling how the boy had begged to save the dog. The man had even tried to enter the burning house, but the intensity of the fire prevented him from advancing inside. Instead of searching for the puppy, he was forced to go outside and wait for rescuers to arrive. Notably, during this interview published in the newspaper, he mentioned a garbage collector he had seen before the fire started. The unknown worker was operating in the neighbor's yard. This caught his attention because the worker shouldn't have been entering private property. Usually, municipal workers simply collect containers positioned in front of houses. However, he hadn't attached particular significance to what he saw and continued with his own business. About 30 minutes passed before he heard the child's screams and saw the flames. That same year, 2014, a new detective was assigned to the investigation, who took on the Hibbs home murder case with renewed energy. Despite all efforts made, by 2015 the case again ended up in the cold case files. The collected and analyzed information was still insufficient to press any charges. The suspect lists were reviewed again, but this brought no new leads. In May 2021, another publication printed yet another article about Joy's murder. The publication was timed to coincide with the 30th anniversary of the tragedy. The crime remained unsolved, but the woman's relatives couldn't accept this. Charles participated in the interview, still preserving the memory of his murdered wife. At that point, the man was 66 years old. He had long since relocated to Washington to live closer to his mother. Despite having entered into a serious relationship with another woman, Joy's portrait still hung in his living room. Notably, he had formed a relationship with a widow who had also lost her husband to violent crime. In the interview, he stated that he still hadn't given up hope of finding the killer who had taken away his young love. The man was determined and even offered $25,000 from his retirement savings for information about the criminal. The victim's son David also participated in the interview. By then, he was a 42-year-old man, but he still remembered how as a 12-year-old boy he had joyfully hurried home to his mother, only to find a burning house instead. David confessed that the thought that the person who had brutalized his beloved mother was still walking free gave him no peace and constantly tormented him. A month after this interview's publication, the Hibbs family decided to raise the reward to $50,000. Given the years that had passed, they considered this their last opportunity to learn the truth. Despite hope still flickering, few truly believed that the monetary reward could move the case forward. However, on May 26, 2022, something unexpected happened. An arrest was made. Around 5 p.m. that day, a man who lived near the Hibbs family home was taken into custody. He was charged with the 1991 murder. The arrested man turned out to be Robert Atkins, who was 56 years old at the time of arrest. The same marijuana dealer. It was established that he had visited Joy that day. His vehicle had been seen in the driveway near the woman's house. For many years, the man had remained in the circle of suspects, but law enforcement hadn't had sufficient evidence to press actual charges. Now circumstances had dramatically changed. The new wave of interest in the case was triggered by publications and statements from the Hibbs family, who had suspected the man of committing the crime all this time. It was after the publication that a witness came forward whose testimony fundamentally changed the course of the investigation. Robert Atkins had lived next door to the Hibbs family all this time. He had even actively participated in community events aimed at protection from the criminal after the murder. Law enforcement representatives had kept him under observation for a long time, but each time the man had managed to evade justice. A new investigative team was formed, which studied Robert's background more thoroughly. The new detectives managed to establish several important facts that had simply been ignored before. First, he was the owner of a dark blue car that matched witnesses' descriptions. But after the out-of-town trip with his wife, the car had unexpectedly changed. Second, the departure itself seemed suspiciously hasty. It gave the impression that this was no coincidence. Third, during initial interrogations, he had admitted that he periodically sold Joy marijuana, including on the morning of the murder day. However, proper attention wasn't paid to him because in 1991 he was a police informant. Investigators received instructions not to touch Robert. Because of this, he wasn't treated with sufficient scrutiny and no deeper investigation was conducted. Now Robert's alibi was carefully verified. It turned out to be not nearly as airtight as previously thought. His wife April had filed for divorce several years before these events. Now she approached law enforcement with a statement that her ex-husband had provided false testimony regarding his alibi. According to the woman, they had left together after Joy's murder. April decided to speak with police officers again. She stated that in 1991, her husband had returned home around 1 p.m. There were bloodstains on his shirt, which frightened her greatly. Trying to calm his wife, Robert claimed he had had a nosebleed. However, there was so much blood that the woman simply couldn't believe it. Eventually, the woman got what she initially believed to be the truth. Robert told her about an attack he had suffered during another illegal dealing operation. According to him, he had been forced to defend himself. During the altercation, Robert had wounded the attacker with a knife. Confirming his words, he touched the pocket where he constantly carried a folding knife. To create evidence of non-involvement, the husband ordered his wife to immediately get in the car after he changed clothes and washed up. The couple headed to the Pocono Mountains area. April was forced to take time off work and gather their 2 young children. The family stayed in the mountain area for 5 days, staying at a hotel while investigators and detectives examined the burned ruins. The Atkins family had provided themselves with an alibi. Besides the usual vacation activities, Robert's wife witnessed him take an unknown bag from the car and go into the woods. The man returned without it. The woman assumed that this was how he had disposed of the clothes and shoes in which he had committed the murder and arson. After all, she never saw those items again. The family had reached the mountain area in Robert's blue Chevrolet, but before returning home, he decided to get rid of the car, quickly selling it below market value. Instead, he managed to buy a cheaper, older car that looked similar to the previous one. Now the woman realized this wasn't coincidence but a planned step to divert attention. April began to suspect her husband's involvement in Joy's murder when she heard about the crime. She tried to convince him to turn himself in to law enforcement. The man became enraged, beat his wife, and began threatening retribution if she continued talking about this topic. So April was forced to fall silent. Law enforcement was already checking the hotel where the Atkins family had vacationed. According to documents, they had indeed checked in that day. The man's alibi was considered reliable. However, now, after more detailed verification, it turned out the couple had registered at the hotel shortly before 5 p.m. on the day of the crime. Meanwhile, Joy had died around noon. Thus, the man had had enough time to commit the crime and drive to the hotel. Robert's younger son, along with his cellmate, claimed that the detained man had unambiguously hinted at his involvement in Joy's death. It turned out that it was Robert Atkins who had been calling the victim with threats. Telling this story, Robert's ex-wife worried about possible legal consequences for harboring a criminal. However, the woman was assured that no charges would be filed. Instead, she was guaranteed immunity from prosecution in exchange for testimony against her ex-husband. The woman emphasized her remorse for not approaching police earlier, but for many years she had feared possible revenge from Robert. She had never heard a direct confession to Joy's murder from her husband, but the number of coincidences seemed excessive. After hearing this account, detectives headed to the Poconos following the woman's directions. However, they couldn't find the bag with the items. Of course, after 3 decades, anything could have happened to it. Subsequently, Joy's son named David also approached law enforcement. Learning about the new circumstances, he recalled an episode that at 12 years old hadn't seemed important to the case. Now David realized the possible direct connection of this event to the murder. Several days before his mother's death, he had observed another visit from Robert to Joy. The man was again offering her marijuana for purchase, but a conflict arose between them. The woman accused him of selling poor-quality product the last time. At that time, the child didn't fully understand the essence of the conversation. But now the memory was particularly vivid. According to the son, after Joy's complaints, Robert became extremely aggressive. He threatened the woman with physical violence and could barely be calmed down, and then only temporarily. As the son recounted, Robert repeated the threats by calling Joy at her workplace several days later. During the first week after the quarrel, the back doors of the family's house were broken with a stone. Also, an unknown person had slashed the tires on the woman's car. The Hibbs had no doubt this was Robert Atkins' handiwork, but couldn't press charges due to lack of evidence of his involvement. However, they hoped the stalker would simply stop bothering them. In September 2022, preliminary hearings were held during which the murder suspect pleaded not guilty. Now a full jury trial was to begin. While the prosecution and defense prepared for trial, more witnesses emerged. Several people from Robert Atkins' inner circle confirmed his tendency toward aggressive behavior and cruelty when angry. Robert's younger brother reported that 35-year-old Joy bore significant resemblance to the defendant's first victim. In 1981, when he lived with his brother in Tennessee, the latter had attacked their aunt, strangling her with a telephone cable and beating her. These actions were extremely similar to what had happened to the deceased. As the brother recounted, the aggression arose unexpectedly. Robert justified himself by constant use of banned substances and mental disorders. He repeatedly complained of auditory hallucinations, claiming that voices had made him attack his relative. His behavior was so violent that at one point the woman was certain of her death. But somehow miraculously, Robert stopped. Unfortunately, no official documentation of this incident existed. The victim had simply found the strength to accept and forgive her nephew. This was probably related to Robert's minor status at the time of the attack, and she had pitied him. Unexpectedly, this story was confirmed by Robert's cousin, who discovered a note hastily written on toilet paper and tucked between the pages of the affected aunt's cookbook. In 1981, the young man had written an apology for the committed assault. This was why the woman had refrained from contacting law enforcement. Now the prosecution had sufficient evidence, including new witnesses. However, most of the evidence remained circumstantial, which could create certain difficulties. Despite this, the chances of success were assessed as quite high. The Hibbs family received hope for an end to this nightmare. In January 2024, court hearings began. Robert Atkins' defenders insisted on the detectives' mistake and their client's innocence. He predictably claimed inadequate quality of evidence collected over all these years. Supposedly they had been obtained in violation of protocols, and the evidence was predominantly circumstantial. The lawyer insisted on insufficient motive for such a brutal attack. Although Robert had sold poor quality product, Charles and Joy had already used most of it, so the dispute arose over only $20 to $30. This was clearly too little to commit murder and arson. The refusal to take the polygraph was explained by nervous disorders. Robert at that time was struggling with mental problems and feared this would affect the test results. However, no documentary confirmation of the defendant's problems was presented. Robert's ex-wife's testimony was explained by her resentment over the divorce and desire for revenge. The murder trial lasted a week. As a result, the jury found Robert Atkins guilty of first-degree murder and 2 counts of arson. The man was sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Additionally, he received 10 years for arson. During the hearings, many representatives of the Hibbs family spoke. Joy's husband stated that Robert had taken away his reason for existence. Several decades had passed, but he had barely been able to recover from these events. The man still felt the effects, although he had returned to faith in God. According to religious convictions, he had to forgive the killer, despite the difficulty of this step. Charles announced that he forgave Robert. The man expressed hope that he would live to an advanced age and have enough time to reflect on the choice made on the day of his wife's murder. While each of the Hibbs relatives spoke about the difficulties of life after the murder, Robert remained indifferent. He stared straight ahead, without emotion and almost motionless. The defendant maintained this position throughout most of the trial. When asked if he wished to speak about what he had done, the man briefly answered in the negative. The judge expressed disappointment in Robert's behavior and his deed, as well as concern about the police department's actions. After all, in 1991 they had given preference to a confidential informant in drug trafficking cases over a wife and mother who died at his hands. The judge emphasized that this decision led to the Hibbs family being unable to learn the truth for more than 3 decades. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.